Hello artists, it's me, Mrs. A. Today we are going to be creating this watercolor technique worksheet. Just like with the color wheel that we created, the video is available in Schoology, so if you fall behind, you can pause it, you can rewind it, so you always have access to that. This assignment is getting us ready to create our watercolor landscape. So it's giving us practice with the medium of watercolor. So let's get started by labeling our paper and then we'll start painting. So let's get our supplies together. What are we gonna need? Watercolors. Watercolors. Wipe off your palette. You'll also need either your pencil or a pen. I'm gonna use a pen so that it's easier to see in my demonstration. And you're also gonna need a cup of water, a paintbrush, and a paper towel. So let's get started. So this assignment is Watercolor Techniques. So let's label the top, Watercolor Techniques. And then we're gonna draw some rectangles that we're going to use to paint within. So draw one here, another one here. We can label those layers and lifting color from dry paint. You want the layout to kind of look like this. So let's draw another rectangle and another one over here. Right, wet on wet. These are the techniques we'll be using. Lifting color from wet paint. Another rectangle. Wet on dry. And protect whites. Draw a line and we'll label this section, draw another line here. So right stippling right here above the line and then write thin to thick line practice. And then the very bottom, write color, blending, practice. So like I said, if you fall behind it all, this is available in Schoology. So then you can do this at your own speed. And these are just some techniques that may help you with your landscape. Let's get started by painting the first two rectangles. You can use whatever color you'd like, except I highly recommend not to use yellow because it will be difficult for me to see the different techniques in the photograph. I'm gonna use blue. So we need to let these two rectangles dry before we can do the next technique. So we're gonna fill those in and that's all we're going to do. You can use a different color if you don't want to use blue. I recommend don't use black and don't use yellow. So now I'm gonna clean my brush off. And we're gonna do wet on wet, which means we're gonna paint this, go all the way up to the lines with water. Now we're gonna take some paint and paint it on top of that water to see what happens. You'll notice that the paint is not bleeding or spreading beyond the rectangle because I only put water up to the edge of the rectangle. So the paint's only going in that watered area. The next technique we will be doing is lifting color from wet paint. So paint in that rectangle with whatever color you're using. Then you'll take some water and you'll make sure you just have water, no color on your brush. And you're going to take your brush and wipe off some of the paint and keep wiping your brush off so it gets the pigment of the color off your brush. This is really helpful if, say, you make a mistake and you paint an area that you didn't mean to paint, or maybe you painted something too dark and you want to make it lighter. You can also use your paper towel. Now we will be painting wet on dry, which means wet paint onto a dry background. You'll notice that when you paint onto a dry background versus a wet background, the color is much darker because you have less water to make it more see-through. So if you want a darker area in your watercolor painting, then you probably don't want to get the paper wet first. The next thing we will be doing is protect the whites. I'm going to paint the shape of a cloud. The reason we're doing this is because we don't have any white paint. So if you're going to have anything white in your painting, like snow or highlights of water or clouds, you're going to need to protect them by not painting them at all. So you need to make sure you know where the white's going to be before you begin painting any other colors. Now we are going to be doing some stippling, which means very tiny dots. So we're going to use just the tip of the paintbrush, the point of the paintbrush, to just practice making some tiny dots. This will give you practice with picking up paint just on the tip of your paintbrush versus the entire paintbrush, and this will help you get smaller details in your landscape painting. Using small little dots may also be helpful in trees or in the water. Now you're going to practice making different size lines. Start with the very tip of the paintbrush to make really thin lines. The tip is that part, the very end, and if you paint using the entire paintbrush, you'll get bigger lines. That's called painting from the tip to the heel of the paintbrush. The heel is where the paintbrush is attached to the handle. Now practice making different size wavy lines, different thicknesses, by pressing harder on the paintbrush. Now let's practice blending colors. I'm going to use all the colors in my paint palette. So I'm going to start with red and then go to orange. If you put them side by side, but then overlap the orange over the red so that they start to blend together, then you'll get the red-orange. Remember that from the color wheel? Then I'm doing yellow. I'm going to overlap the yellow and the orange a little bit to get a yellow-orange. Those were the warm colors on the color wheel. Now we're going to start to move into the cool colors, painting green and overlapping the yellow to make them blend together. And now blue. And violet. Warm colors tend to move closer to you in a painting. We'll go over that more when we talk about the landscape. And cool colors tend to recede into the background. Cool colors remind you of water and sky and even ice and snow. One of your painting requirements in your landscape painting will be to do multiple layers. So let's go back to the top left corner and start to add layers in the rectangle that says layers. So that means we're going to put another layer or another color or even the same color, blue, on top of that rectangle. This will be really helpful when painting skies, water, trees. Everything in your landscape painting should have multiple layers. It's hard to see in the video, but you can see through the first color I put down and you can see the blue underneath it. You'll be able to tell on your painting. Now let's practice lifting color from dry paint. It's very similar to lifting color from wet paint, except for now the paint is dry, so you won't get as much of the color off. So if you paint an area in your painting and then it dries and you decide that you want it to be lighter, just take some water on your paintbrush and paint over it to get the paint off. When you're finished with the watercolor techniques, take a photo and submit it in Schoology.